I believe that the financial industry and the DeFi industry specifically has a capability and the potential to train artificial intelligence by the nature of this market and by the nature of what we ask to algorithms in the world of decentralized finance. The beauty of crypto and DeFi is, number one, it's totally open. So everyone have access to mountains and mountains of data. In DeFi, everyone have access to data. The data is widely open and the data is very well structured by the nature of blockchain. AI agents and LLM in general, when they are trained in the context of finance, they are trained to digest much more data from the market, from social media, from the news, from all kinds of sources, and take decisions.
Welcome to High Stakes, the podcast committed to demystifying the institutional adoption of blockchain technology. I'm your host, Alex Nwaka, and today we're elevating the Web3 discourse in a series of conversations with industry iconoclasts that are shaping the future of Web3. Now let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of High Stakes. I am your host, Alex Nwaka, and today I am joined by Charles Dosi, the CEO of dYdX Foundation. Charles, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Alex. We're very much looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. So, Charles, maybe give the audience a bit of context and background on your career, and then also a little tee up on dYdX, and then we can jump into a fluid conversation of Q&A.
Absolutely. So I'm Charles. I'm the CEO of the dYdX Foundation. Before dYdX, I was with Consensus as head of Asia and global head of BD. So I've been in the space for quite some time, building on different stacks, building numerous use cases from CBDCs to DeFi, NFTs. And at dYdX, essentially dYdX is a world-leading decentralized exchange protocol, which is focusing on the world's largest market in crypto, which is a crypto derivative market. So dYdX has a long history back to starting in 2018, and has been evolving and making the best of technology available at the time to essentially grow the protocol and grow the audience and users of the protocol.
Excellent. So Charles, as you mentioned, you've had a pretty long and sort of impressive career. Folks really look back, not only Consensus, but you've also been involved in a number of different FinTech, sort of companies in sort of your history. So really curious, sort of the journey into crypto for you, because again, I found that in the crypto industry, no two people have the same path into crypto. So what brought you into the crypto industry, and how do you sort of leverage some of your previous career history from FinTech and leverage it in your current role?
When I was younger, I was a student and I had a limited budget, so I was very much into peer-to-peer file sharing. So think of BitTorrent and the generations before BitTorrent. So I got fairly exposed early on to decentralized computing in general, where essentially computers were connecting to one another and building a network. So at the time, it was about MP3s and movies and music exchanged via those new networks. So high degree of familiarity with peer-to-peer network. And a friend of mine shared with me this white paper talking about peer-to-peer money. And I thought, I know peer-to-peer very well. I believe I know money. Let's have a look. And essentially, it was the beginning of my journey into Bitcoin. I was not so fascinated at first by the technology itself because I was kind of exposed to it already. But what really triggered my attention and make me really dive deeper was the fact that I realized I did not understood money at all. I had a little bit of money in my wallet at the time. I went to school and university and everything, but that was a very, very high level of understanding of what was money. And Bitcoin made me understand money and made me understand how it's important for the society and how it's important of a revolution happening, mixing money and Bitcoin in general. So I started my journey in 2011, buying my first Bitcoin on Taobao, the equivalent of eBay. I paid some attention. Eventually, I sold everything in 2011 as well. So welcome to my life. You make some mistake early and you learn from them, hopefully. And I came back in crypto in 2015, 16, when Ethereum came up and brought something more beyond peer-to-peer kind of updates between nodes and operators, bringing this kind of business logics on chain and having smart contracts. And that's where I really came back into the space much more intensively, and decided to eventually make everything I could to make it a job. So I passed some of the early degrees and diplomas in crypto. Bitcoin certified professional. I was one of the early students of B9 University, which was an online crypto university. At the time, there was no program. And yes, spent some time with the Hong Kong government. At the time, I was head of FinTech. So even though I was wearing a white shirt and a tie during the day, at night I was kind of swapping to a t-shirt and deep diving into the space. And as you said, I was an entrepreneur. I spent some time with the government, and eventually this gives you a lot of different flavors of how technology impacts things and how, like a city like Hong Kong could think about how technology can enable the next iteration of their global financial hub, but also thinking of how consensus has been exploring throughout his early days, many different use cases from CBDCs to NFTs. So I was building a lot of central bank digital currencies with multiple banks and central banks in Asia. And all of this just give you a very good illustration and very wide spectrum of what the technology can do. So I'm definitely in for the tech, and probably like you, I'm in for the people as well. As you said, everyone have his own journey in the space. In a day, crypto makes you meet some engineers, some ambitious executives, some scammers sometimes. I mean, it's a zoo, right, as an industry. So it's just bring a little bit of spice in your days, and it makes them even go further and faster. So definitely passionate about the space and passionate about everything I'm learning along the way. And today at dYdX, what is very interesting for me is that we are all learning hands-on how to build an app chain, application chain, which if you spend some time in the space, as I did, we obviously all study and contributed to Bitcoin as a first blockchain. And then we spent some time for the most part on Ethereum. And then came the narrative of Appchain. When an application is large enough, it can basically, if it desires so, to essentially build its own infrastructure for its own ecosystem. And dYdX had the chance to do that about 12 months ago now. So what keeps everyone busy within the dYdX ecosystem is building this app chain, having a blockchain where you really control the full stack from the chain itself to the business logics to the performance. You build an ecosystem with your own validators, and Validation Cloud is one of the prime contributor in the security and performance of the chain. So thank you guys for your great work here. But really having this kind of new chapter in my learnings in the industry, from Bitcoin to Ethereum to Appchain, where you get to apply a lot of different topics, and it comes with a lot of responsibility, but also a lot of freedom to shape things and to get this app and this ecosystem moving in the right direction, and having much more of a say in how the infrastructure should be supporting the growth of the application and the protocol overall.
And then to your point, there's with Appchains specifically, there's so much debate historically on sort of private versus public blockchain, and Appchains are sort of a very unique sort of hybrid of those two in some ways, in terms of like the control over sort of the different components of the infrastructure stack and exactly how you deploy those. So Charles, one of the things that resonated with me is that you really drew attention to the fact that the crypto industry is very, very diverse in terms of people's backgrounds, where they come from, and so forth. It's obviously also a very sort of international industry. There's folks literally all over the globe. You've spent 20 years by my count in Asia, specifically Hong Kong. You sort of highlighted your work that you did both in sort of the private and sort of to a lesser extent public sector with the government. You've even written a book, really about FinTech and crypto entrepreneurship in that ecosystem in Hong Kong. So I'm just curious, for somebody who spent 2 decades in sort of Asia and Hong Kong in particular, is there anything that you would highlight to the audience that, you would say makes Hong Kong or just sort of that portion of the region special from an innovation hub perspective in both finance and crypto? And maybe how that's evolved over time, maybe since, over the last 5 years. I know that you're now in the Middle East, but I'm just really curious, just from a historical perspective, how you look at it.
Absolutely. So indeed, I wrote a book about entrepreneurs in crypto in Hong Kong. The book is called Block Kong. If you want to check it online. The first thing I'd say, Alex, is, and what really kind of touched me at the right place with Web3 is that when you give space to people for innovation, you see just some really elegant and very powerful talents coming up. And what I found with the first iterations of the internet, Web 1 and maybe Web 2, it was very much US centric and maybe Silicon Valley centric. So great, it made a lot of progress for everyone. But what Web3 brought was essentially opening the stage to many more talents. And Web3 got talents, as a TV program will say, right? And you see people coming from Asia, coming from Europe, coming from so many different places, and it's just push up the competition and just accelerate the growth for everyone. So I think being based in Asia, I just realized that within the Web 1 kind of era, it was very much kind of following the US lead. And within Web 3, we've seen the Indians, we've seen the Chinese coming up in the market and just bringing value to everyone. So that was something very positive. The region of Asia is just, first, it's a very, very big region. People think of Asia sometimes of Singapore, Hong Kong, and Japan. It's just massive. It represents, including India, 2 to 3 billion people. So obviously it's a patchwork and not everything is the same over there. What we've seen over the internet, they started with an internet specifically for the Chinese internet, which was open, but then because of their culture and because the way their country is run, eventually they kind of closed their internet. But nevertheless, this internet was large enough as the Chinese internet to deploy a lot of innovation and some kind of locally brewed innovation. So it's interesting to see that how the internet evolved, and that's something maybe I've seen firsthand in Asia. Is we always think of the internet as one layer, like this HTTP layer. But if you carefully look and if you follow the history, you realize that either we like it or not, we are building some kind of walled garden, and the new versions of the internet is happening on WeChat. The new version of the internet is happening on Telegram. People are spending more time on super apps. Should it be Line in Japan, Kakao in Korea? So we have this kind of walled garden of the internet, and it's important for us. Should you be an engineer or an app developer to really think about your distribution, because the distribution has been evolving really a lot, and also leave the space when you develop products to let the people build their apps their own way. Something which is always kind of surprising when I open the apps I'm still using from Asia. Think of WeChat or think of Alipay. Usually the interface looks very much saturated. If you look at this with your European or American lenses, thinking, oh my God, they're putting too much choice here, and there are too many icons. It's just tiring before even clicking on anything. And there is this kind of very different philosophy of design and UX. But I think everyone should be very humble to that. Like if you like to cook your steak this way, and if I like to cook my steak this way, eventually I'm sure we're going to have a great dinner together, and everyone should be respectful. So what I really learned from Asia is to stay very humble and listen and look at things before taking assumptions too early on however is the product or whatever strategic direction they're taking, because they usually just address a different market, and this market is really sizable. The Chinese apps have enough of their own market, their domestic market, without thinking too much about expansion. Of course, you've got some Chinese app expanding, but many of them are overly busy with their domestic market. And we start to see the same in India, for example. So it's super important, I think, for everyone to keep very much a candid view on these regions and making sure you spend time and possibly visit either India and or China, so you get a sense of how the same technologies or similar technologies are essentially crafted for different audience, which I'm sure everyone would like to onboard, but also with different philosophy in terms of product, in terms of UX, and I think the reality is many new ideas in the West are actually old ideas from the East, and vice versa. So that's something which I really enjoy. And I think also in Asia, they've been always very, very ambitious and happy to launch things and kind of put them on the side if they were not too successful quickly. That's something which we see also in the West, but in Asia, it just goes way, way, way faster.
Obviously, as the CEO of a foundation, right, there's a variety of different things that you're responsible for in any given week, a lot of priorities. You were previously the global head of BD at Consensus, which, obviously one of the largest organizations sort of in Web3. I'm curious, maybe demystify for people who, are really curious about CEO of a major foundation. What are they spending most of their time thinking about, either strategically or otherwise? And maybe if you can weave in, some components of your experience at Consensus and how, that prepared you in some ways for, taking on this role at dYdX.
Absolutely. So maybe to explain you my role at the foundation, it's important to explain to you how the dYdX ecosystem is built and works today. So dYdX started as a more of a centralized team, led and founded by Antonio Giuliano, the founder of dYdX. And then with the evolution of dYdX, moving from Ethereum layer 1, then to Ethereum layer 2 on Starkware, and eventually today on its own blockchain, I would say the organizations and the ecosystem of dYdX evolve massively. So today, within dYdX, you can possibly count, I would say, 5 organizations which are dedicated to dYdX itself. dYdX Labs, which is based in the US, led by Antonio Giuliano, which is producing the software and making it available to validators and developers to build from it. Then the foundation, which is registered in Switzerland with a team, I would say, dispatched in multiple countries. And then you have 3 DAOs, the Operation DAO, which is running some core services for the chain, the Grants DAO, which is distributing grants, and the latest DAO was created a few months back, which is a Treasury DAO, managing the treasury of the dYdX protocol itself. So as a foundation, we focus on quite a few things, actually. So the team is 16 people strong. One team is dedicated to governance, making sure that the governance around dYdX is moving as fast as possible. So we remain very agile, even though we are decentralized, and making sure that a maximum level of context is shared with people who wants to participate in the governance. So if you look at this work together with all the governance proposers and the voters and token holders, more than 200 different governance proposals have been proposed and voted over the past year or so. So that's very important to keep the velocity of a decentralized ecosystem. Another team is dedicated on BD, business development, making sure we had some strategic partnerships built around this open source software. We have the marketing team as well, taking care of the branding and the promotion of the brand in multiple markets. A team is dedicated to integration and solutions. And then we have some more internal teams for everything related to admin. So it's a very, even though it's I'm kind of running a non-for-profit organization, I would say the energy and the objective are very much oriented towards growth of the ecosystem. And we're not selling or invoicing anyone for anything, but we are definitely dedicated 26 hours a day to the growth of the ecosystem. And each sub-team of the foundation is working with the ecosystem, with DAOs, with various contributors to make the BD accelerating, to make the governance and so on accelerating. One takeaway from my time at Consensus is you really have to pick your battles. In the world of Web3 is a fantastic world, and you are essentially showered of opportunity all week long. There is always something new, there is always something exciting, but eventually you really want to be strategic and kind of reverse engineer and thinking what will be the output of whatever initiative you're going to go after. So that's what we were trying to do at the foundation and within the ecosystem overall, is to make sure that we really pick our battles. Some of the battles of this year for the foundation is really working with a lot of ambitions and energy and very tactically on the distribution of dYdX. We know for a fact that if your products are better distributed than your competitors, essentially, if you place your product on the right shelves, the metrics of your protocol will just increase by an order of magnitude. The metrics can be the number of users, the volume, the liquidity on various markets. There is multiple metrics you can measure. So at Consensus over time, with kind of the footprint of Consensus, we were very, very thoughtful about what kind of initiative and campaign we were launching, and making sure that before we made our decision, we were kind of studying and kind of testing the water and talking with customers. And then when the decision was made, is really going and deploying resources and time towards those various campaigns. So call, I call them commercial sprint. And you know that, Alex, that with your engineers, you will sometimes have sprint for 2 weeks, fixing a new feature or launching a new initiative. And we do the same. Should it be in governance or BD, making sure we accelerate on some topics. And that's a nice mix you learn when you work in the great companies of our space, where the leadership and the executive in general have a strong engineering background, so they can bring some best practices which are applying to engineers, but apply equally well to sales and kind of frontline staff.
I would describe any great technology as sort of a very like sort of elegant recipe, right? It's a combination of a couple of ingredients. And so when you think about dYdX and sort of the most important ingredients for a decentralized exchange, how do you think about those items and how you sort of, I'll call it stack rank them relative to one another?
So you start first with a good base in this recipe. The base here is the addressable market. So dYdX has the privilege and the unfair advantage to be focused since 2018 on the world's largest crypto market, the crypto derivative market. That's a pattern you find exactly in the same way in traditional finance, where the derivative market in traditional finance is by 10x bigger than the spot market for equity, for example. So first, you focus on a market which is very promising and sizable and profitable quickly. Then the other advantage of dYdX, I think, within this recipe is focus. As I said earlier, in the world of crypto, and it's the same for you at Validation Cloud, I'm sure, you've got new opportunities, new narrative, new partnerships, new everything coming every week. And you really want to be clear about your identity. What do you want to achieve? How do you want to be recognized? And for what do you want to be recognized? And one of the beauty of dYdX is that the team has been dedicated to perps, and we can touch on perps in a few minutes, since the early days. So it really brings, again, an unfair advantage. The dYdX team is not opportunistic. It's dedicated to this market since 2018. So number one, the market. Number two, the focus of the team. And then a focus on innovation. Thinking, okay, the perps market exists in a decentralized way on dYdX, for example, but it also exists on centralized exchanges such as Binance and Coinbase. So how do you define a vision, and how do you define essentially roadmaps? Should they be quarterly, yearly, or for more time? And how do you define them so essentially your project and your product shape itself? A very strong identity and a very strong value proposition, which does not compete anymore with your competitor. In other words, how do you build DeFi specific innovation? It's very easy to kind of lay down and explain as a concept, but it takes time, it takes tests, it takes beta versions, it takes a lot of efforts over years to essentially designing a product which will be addressing the same market, but with a value proposition, with an experience which will essentially leave behind your competition. And the biggest competition for perps DEXs, decentralized exchanges, is not so much amongst ourselves. We have competitions amongst DEXs, but the biggest competitors are essentially SEXs, centralized exchanges, the Binance and the Coinbase of the world. So this is where the majority of the volume, 90% of the perps volume, is happening on centralized exchanges. This is where millions of users are essentially starting their journey on crypto on the top of centralized infrastructure. But we know the history is written. We have to go through chapter after one by one, but the history is written. Everyone will be eventually living and executing his crypto life on chain. So how do you build the right bridges? How do you build innovation which will make a Binance user or a Coinbase user think, I just need to go to this platform. They have something which is not being offered. So that's I would say like the last component of this kind of recipe. And then you kind of bring it together with the right people, the right engineers, the right marketing people, the right business development people, the right HR people. This part is more like a traditional business, but it's equally hard. It's not easy to keep the people engaged. It's not easy to convince people to join you in the early days. But if you have this kind of base of a good total addressable market, if you have this vision of building something which will kind of follow the flow of the market, people are on their way to leave centralized platforms to decentralized platform. And if you are relentlessly innovating to create an unfair advantage and unique innovation for your own project, then I would say many stars align, and then it creates some kind of flywheel where you get user attractions, you get user feedback, you keep iterating faster, you're able to hire the right people, and hopefully things are running well for you.
Well, I think you're highlighting a very important point on innovation, which is, typically called the innovator's dilemma. And so for, the larger centralized exchanges that may have, sort of a larger component of market share today, they're not necessarily incentivized to, sort of disrupt themselves or to innovate on, necessarily at the same velocity as maybe, sort of what I'll call more emerging platforms that, move things to a more decentralized sort of space. Charles, one thing I wanted to ask you to do for the audience that
Alex,
may or may not be.
Sorry to interrupt you. One thing I would like to mention also.
Sure.
Within this recipe of kind of DeFi innovation, there is one thing we should really keep very close to our heart and always come back. We are all building on trustless technology, but we are still in the business of trust. If I decide to stake my dYdX token with Validation Cloud, yes, it's about your security. Yes, it's about your performance. But it's also because eventually I get to know your brand via your marketing, because you're speaking at events, because I can see your face here and there. I can see the face and the kind of thought leadership from your team. You're building trust with your audience. You're building trust with your partners. You're building trust with the end users of your partners. So the trust component in crypto, some people think we don't need to trust anymore. The smart contract is doing everything. I'm saying trust cannot stay in the air. It needs to anchor. And in our space, people will not anchor on the same things, but they will still need to trust the team, to make sure you're consistent, to make sure you're kind of readable from the outside as an organization. And focusing on trust beyond the pure technology innovation is always paying off. There is a lot of people which are in this game for a short run, but you see that there is this kind of DeFi renaissance. You see that MakerDAO is still here because some project never cut a corner, right? Some KOLs in our space are still here because they did not cut a corner neither. Or if they made mistakes, they get them fixed, or they pay the price for it without cutting a corner one more time. So the trust aspect in this recipe for best success, I think, is important.
No, and I think to build off of that, if we were just to look at blockchain as a technology, it really is the productization of trust. I really very much believe that. But I think, to look at it in the extreme of there's just the productization of trust while ignoring sort of the human and social element of trust, I think gets sort of it a bit wrong. I think to your point that you just made very elegantly, that, it really is both, in a variety of different ways and forms. So Charles, where I wanted to go next was really diving a bit deeper into some of your offering, and I think just giving the audience that may not be as familiar with derivatives, maybe a quick explainer on what perpetuals are, or perps. They're obviously, one of your flagship product on dYdX, and I think folks would be curious, one, what they are, and then why they're so popular. And then we can talk a little bit more about user base, who uses them, and how that user base evolves. But let's maybe just start with, setting the context of what are perpetuals.
Absolutely. So perpetuals are a kind of derivative. As I mentioned earlier, derivative is the world's largest crypto market. It's 10 times bigger than spot. So within the family of financial products, the family of derivative financial products, there are this contract, this futures contract called perpetuals. So in traditional finance, or historically, futures contracts were dated contracts. So you will be able to express your opinion on one asset within a 30 days time frame, or maybe 60 days or 90 days time frame, and then you will take essentially a position, long or short, on this asset over a period of time, and each contract will essentially expire. And at the end of the contract, you will get like the outcome of your bet. And I think it was around 2018 in Hong Kong, but by our good friend Arthur Hayes from BitMEX, and I know he's a friend of Validation Cloud as well as dYdX. Arthur Hayes and the team essentially very popular this new concept of futures contracts, which are called perpetuals. We call those contracts perpetuals because they're different from the old version, which is dated. Perpetuals never expire. So essentially, you can take a position on the market without having to worry anymore. Is my contract expiring in 30 days, in 60 days? If I jump on this contract like 1 week before expirations, what should be the price of it? Every hour, those contracts kind of take a snapshot of the market and rebalance themselves. So how do they rebalance as a futures contract? Think of a perpetual contract a little bit like a heater thermostat. When you set your thermostat, for example, at 22 degrees, essentially the heater will kind of calibrate his efforts to make sure that your room will stay at 22 degrees. For a perpetual contract, it's somehow kind of similar. The perpetual contract is aiming at always being at par with the price of the spot. The price of the spot of the asset. So if you have a Bitcoin perpetual contract, the perpetual contract will constantly adjust itself to be as close as possible of the price of Bitcoin spot. And the way this kind of mechanism happen is via funding rate. So every now and then, every hour usually, essentially the side of the contract which are going long, if the price of the contract is a little bit too high, the long users and traders will pay some funding rate to the short in order to basically rebalance the contract, and vice versa. So they are very elegant and very agile way to express your opinion on the market, and they are flexible, they don't expire, and they don't require you to essentially own the asset itself. So if you want to buy a perpetual contract for Bitcoin, for example, you would be able to essentially possibly get the upside or benefit from the downside if you want to short it without acquiring per se the Bitcoin itself. So it gives you as a trader, should you be a very sophisticated trader or a more humble trader, it allows you to trade on multiple things without having to deal with all the logistics of having the token. So if you want to trade Solana, Ethereum, and Bitcoin in perps, this is exactly the same wallet. This is exactly the same platform. There is no complexities behind that. So the reason they're popular is because they essentially allow users to trade with very high agility 24/7, and they also are now deployed on permissionless and decentralized platforms such as dYdX, so people can trade them 24 hours a day. They can trade them very easily from their wallet, and they can also contribute to the platform in a much more active and proactive manner compared to large perps platforms such as the centralized exchanges you will know, the Coinbase and the Binance of the world. So perps are not for my mother or my little cousin, and not everyone is trading perps, and it's not for everyone neither. But it's very, very agile and essentially a tool which has been designed for larger size trader, for more sophisticated, for institutionals. So if you think of market makers, if you think of hedge funds, or many of the whales are essentially expressing their view on the market via derivatives. So the derivative market is very much driving the price one another will pay on the spot market. So that's why it's an important market, and that's why this innovation, which was brought again to the world attention via BitMEX, is still striving today, and it's really the core of the business of centralized exchanges and the core of the business for many DeFi protocols such as dYdX.
And so when you think about, you did describe a little bit on sort of the target user for this is more of a agile, more advanced institutional type trader. When you think about how the market, sort of the core market evolves here, is the underlying sort of thought process that the growth is really going to be driven by more institutions coming into the space and leveraging this product? And maybe describe, sort of how you see that unfolding, right? Like what percentage of let's just call it traditional, finance, firms, hedge funds are currently in this market, and what you think the full potential might be over the next 5 to 10 years if we see broader scale adoption.
That's a great question. So as you're describing today, the perps market is mostly for institutionals and sophisticated trader. What it means for an app developer, it means that you've got a smaller size of users, but those users are much more power users. They basically trade like large size trades compared to maybe a retail exchange, which will be doing spot only, where people will trade $25, $100 here and there. So the total addressable market in terms of number of users might be smaller, but those users are power users. So that's one thing. The other thing is we are at the beginning of the kind of history of this technology of perps. We usually start with something very complex where you need to be eventually some kind of financial engineer to properly use perps. But what we see coming notably from Asia is people kind of abstracting the complexity of those very kind of sophisticated technology and perps and building much more simple product on top of it. So we start to see, for example, protocols building some kind of swap trades where an AI engine or maybe a product designer will show you a card which will give you like a scenario. Like Bitcoin will be reaching 120 within 24 hours of the ceremony for the first day of Trump, and then you will be able to say yes, I believe in that. No, I don't believe in that, and simplifying the strategies a lot. So it comes back to the point we discussed earlier about how different parts of the world will address this market. The product started with the early adopter wave, where people were ready to put their hands on API and designing complex investment. But what we see now is, for example, AI trading agents starting to use perps to hedge by themselves strategies. We see more and more people which are using the underlying perps technology and infrastructure, but building some much more kind of accessible product and value proposition. So I see this market of perps being less and less visible, I should say, and more used because it brings much more kind of flexibility. And as I said, like simplifying the logistic behind, you can trade all kind of assets from multiple origins. If you look at dYdX, even though we are on the dYdX chain, you can trade any meme coin on Solana is available on dYdX. You don't need to bridge, you don't need to wait, you don't need to pay fees. You basically get an exposure to the Trump coin if you want to, or any other meme coin. Same for Uniswap on Base. So I think the perp market will be leveraged more and more to essentially bring an easier and smoother experience and abstracting away all the complexities it might be able to offer to developers, and to let the product people saying, actually, I can smooth the experience, I can simplify a journey using not the underlying asset per se, but a synthetic exposure to it. And that's why also the derivative market is so large in the equity world. Is without knowing, sometimes in the traditional finance, you will be consuming derivatives, and they are actually packed within an active managed ETF or some kind of funds which will hedge itself to kind of reduce the volatility of an asset, for example. So we can imagine products where people will say, okay, you will have a long-term view on Bitcoin, and we will develop a kind of a linear exposure to Bitcoin, but having some protections for the volatility. So your journey within your investment remain opinionated on the asset without having possibly the downside being kind of neutralized by various trading strategies.
Yeah, and I think that this gets into, sort of the complexity that you can get into, when you talk about trading strategies. I think most folks, sort of the common public think about, taking a position on sort of where the underlying price is going to go on a particular security. That's just sort of like the delta, right? Sort of, view of the world. But, oftentimes in some of these really sophisticated shops, they're not worried about, sort of the price movement necessarily. They want to bet on the volatility, right? Which is a completely different set of things and requires derivatives to be able to do that. And then there's also just a matter of leverage, right? Which is a whole nother sort of component here that derivatives enable, above and beyond, to your point, holding the underlying.
You will be surprised, Alex, how many users of dYdX will be relaxed and confident, whatever is the market situation. from time to time, we have conversations with users, and it might be a bull market or it might be like a flash crash or anything like this. The proper traders are basically essentially making money whatever is the situation. They're calibrating their risk, and they are taking a risk management approach which is extremely well defined because they understand those products very well. So to come back to your original questions, I think this kind of really comfortable strategies where you cover yourself, whatever the direction of the market will probably be packaged in an elegant way and offered to many more users in the near future.
I want to give you the opportunity, Charles, to talk a little bit about what you're most excited about rolling out this year on dYdX, whether those are features and capabilities. And I think to your earlier commentary on sort of the competitive landscape, maybe give that, the competitive landscape as a comparison when you talk about some of these features and capabilities, because I think it would just be good to see those things in sort of a stark relief for the audience.
So the derivative market is highly competitive, not only this year in 25, but for decades. So we have competitors coming in and out of the market. Every 6 months or so, there are new projects coming up, and the competition is real in the DEX space. But the real competition, I would say, this is at least what we discussed with our team, is not so much DEXs, which are also trying to get their fair part of the market, like we are. But for more importantly are the centralized exchanges. This is where 95+% of the derivative market is happening. So what I'm very excited about is how essentially the distribution of dYdX will evolve in 2025, and how some projects will come to light in the coming months, as they are already under construction by various partners, and how dYdX will be integrated into other infrastructure. Should it be a centralized exchange? Should it be a non-custodial wallet? There are multiple ways where dYdX will be consumed via multiple front ends and directions. So the distribution of dYdX is very interesting for me, and is going to basically grow the cake for everyone in the DeFi space. If we are able as an industry to essentially help more people migrating from centralized crypto to decentralized crypto. So distribution is one thing I'm very excited about. What I'm very excited about is how the market is evolving. We see on the centralized exchanges side, all those centralized exchanges are essentially in a global race to acquire licenses in multiple jurisdictions. For the most part, when a centralized exchange gets a license in a country, they get a license exclusively for spot. So over a week, all the users of this centralized exchange in that country can only trade spot, and they cannot do lending anymore. They cannot do futures anymore. So in a way, when centralized exchanges are trying to get regulated, they also have to kind of narrow by an order of magnitude they're offering to users. So we see a lot of centralized exchange users which are constantly jumping shops because they get less and less places where they really have the freedom to essentially trade the way they want to. And that's really for the benefit of DeFi in general, should you be in spot or in derivative like we are. And the last part I'm excited about, it's coming in multiple fronts. It's a little bit trendy. I try to look at it in a more first principle and humble way, but I would say like put some attention and resources around it is how AI essentially is starting to come in crypto. A lot of coins coming from multiple directions. Yes, trading agents are already on dYdX. Some of them are trading already, aging their strategies. So that's a good thing. But what I'm more excited about is I believe that the financial industry and the DeFi industry specifically has a capability and the potential to train more intelligent artificial intelligence by the nature of this market and by the nature of what we ask to algorithms in the world of decentralized finance. So the beauty of crypto and DeFi is, number one, it's totally open. So everyone have access to mountains and mountains of data. It's not the same as traditional finance, where many of the trading is happening behind closed door in black boxes. So there is only so many people who can train themselves. In DeFi, everyone have access to data. The data is widely open, and the data is very well structured by the nature of blockchain. The second thing, which is important, besides the wide access to a lot of data on markets, AI agents and LLM in general when they are trained in the context of finance, they are trained to digest much more data from the market, from social media, from the news, from all kind of sources, and take decisions. If you think of ChatGPT is a fantastic type of LLM. I'm not an expert in that, but my understanding is they are basically building a massive encyclopedia with some kind of teacher which can bring you to the right page and write something for you from all the knowledge as they've been kind of combining together. But it's not really taking decisions. In finance, LLMs are trained to take decisions. So I believe in 2025, we're going to start to see a new category of LLMs and AI agents coming up, which will be coming from the finance background. They will be coming from environments which are very high velocity, where you need to take decisions, where you need to digest news coming live to you. Should it be a market move? Should it be a social media trend or anything like this? And that's where also I think DeFi can bring something very noticeable to the world of AI in general by the nature of the market.
No, we agree. I mean, when we look at, a number of the things that are going on the AI front, and we're, very much sort of on the bleeding edge of that, much more for us to talk about, there, Charles, when we get together next. But, we definitely agree on the impact of data and AI as it relates to, this particular category in DeFi. But then also as we think about other sort of application specific data, we think that that's really going to define the next 18 months in the space and sort of the user experience related to that. So, Charles, we ask every one of our guests for what we call the high stakes hot take, which is, their biggest and boldest prediction for 2025. I know you touched a little bit on, some of the features and sort of market dynamics, but is there one particular thing that you're looking at and saying, hey, this could be a really sort of bold thing that happens this year?
I think what we're going to see is one or two wallets which will really hit the market very quickly. They will probably be cross-chain in a way, offering access to Bitcoin. But I think this market is still fragmented, and I believe one of the big Web2 player or maybe a FinTech company will come up and will start on day one with 50 to 100 million active users. And this is probably my hot take is we should expect more people joining the party, and some of them will be fat. So it will be a challenge for those which are mid-size to upcoming size, but it will be good for the overall level of activity in our space. So will this be Apple? Will this be Revolut? Will this be Robinhood? A lot of things are in conversation, but big players are coming our way, and it's going to be a little bit of a shake to all of us, but also a greater opportunity.
Awesome. With that, we'll wrap it. Charles Dosey from the dYdX Foundation. Thanks, Charles, for joining. We look forward to having you on another episode soon.
Thank you, Alex. See you soon.
Keep exploring and keep innovating. Learn more at validationcloud.io and follow us on X and LinkedIn to stay connected as we continue to shape Web3 for institutions. This is High Stakes with Alex Nwaka, signing off.